Number 3.
Okay, so for some context to this story, my friends and I were all around 14 or 15 years old during this encounter. We also lived abroad in Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic. We all attended an international school and we were like family. This was 5 people, mind you, and a very close-knit group. Our parents generally trusted us to go off on our own in safe parts of Prague, mainly around our school. This is relevant later on. During the summertime, we would sometimes go out to the theme park instead of our usual haunts. Of course, our parents would often come, along with siblings, so we didn't do this much. It was too difficult and too little alone time, but now I really understand why they always insisted on staying close and being together. On one of our visits to the theme park in late August, one of my friends, Emma, met a native guy a year older than her. Let's call him Alex. She had the best Czech out of us all, so they could easily communicate. They seemed to click and exchange phone numbers so they could communicate with each other in the future. Immediately, I had a bad vibe coming from this guy. He certainly didn't look 16, and he had the creeper eyes running all over her body. When we eventually walked back to our parents, I tugged on her arm and suggested that she deleted his phone number because of the creepy aura he seemed to have. I was the shortest of our clique, and my best friends often protected me the most if we were ever in a bad situation. I was somewhat naive at this time, which certainly didn't help my case. Emma snorted at my suggestion and told me I was just paranoid about people I didn't know. I still had the uneasy feeling, though, while Emma talked about him in line for one of the rides. Mackenzie, without a doubt, is the one I'm closest with, and she noticed and asked me what was wrong while we sat together in the Czech version of a Fairyland and its small world hybrid. Explaining my unease about Alex and his flimsy facade of a teenage guy, Mackenzie, thankfully, took my concerns seriously and helped me voice them to Emma, Chloe, and Camille. Emma and Chloe thought we were being stupid, while Camille was conflicted. In hindsight, they probably thought the scary stories about girls getting sold into the sex trade were making us paranoid. We didn't get anywhere, and we eventually had to move on to the next ride. Mackenzie made Camille and I promise to help her keep an eye on Emma, but not to tell her, because she would get secretive and refuse to tell us anything. We agreed not to tell her parents unless it got out of hand, because this situation was tricky enough without our parents barging in and making it worse. This was the 14-15-year-old mentality talking, which almost cost us. Emma and Alex talked all the time over the phone, and eventually started going on dates. She never told her parents about this and would often cut practice to see him. This obviously bothered us, but it was impossible to get through that she needed to let her parents meet him so she could stop cutting practice and hiding her relationship from them. After a while, Emma was talking about their first kiss, falling deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. Finally, around mid-October, Emma left us on one of our treks through the mall to meet Alex. Chloe was sick that day, and with no one to stop us, we decided to follow her and see where she was going to meet him. Following, around 7 meters behind her, we saw her go out to the edges of the city centre and into a decrepit coffee shop. Watching from a good distance away, Alex and her sat outside and talked, occasionally stopping to sip coffee. They kissed a number of times, but Alex had an extremely eerie look, like he was driven more by lust instead of love. This brought Camille over to our side immediately, as she and Mackenzie were the only ones who had not seen Alex yet. We left and then returned to my house to set up our game plan of trying to convince Emma that Alex was a major creeper. Before we even started though, Emma called us to tell us about how she thought that he was the one. After trying to convince her that she should tell her parents if they were that serious about each other, she blatantly refused and accused us of being jealous. We denied it, apologized, and eventually she hung up after inquiring about our homework for that weekend. At this point, we decided that the situation was dire enough to go get our parents. They seemed to be the only viable option left, but we were still terrified of breaking the friendship we had with Emma and Chloe. With the hope that Emma would still be out on her date with Alex, we dashed over to her home. Thankfully, her mother was home at the time with her younger brother. We quickly told her about what was going on, and she seemed upset about this. However, we made her promise not to tell Emma that we had tattled. Instead, we proposed it could have been found out by checking her phone records. Feeling better having spilled the beans, we all returned to my house and loitered in my room until Mackenzie and Camille had to go home. The next day at school, we were confronted by a furious Emma and Chloe. They probably figured out that we had told on her and declared that they no longer wanted to be friends with us. I was crushed, but Camille and Mackenzie assured me that they would come around to our point of view eventually. I wasn't sure our friendship would ever be the same, but I tried to convince myself that we did the right thing. A couple of weeks later, while Camille was over at my house, I heard the doorbell ring. When I came to the door, it was Emma, Chloe and Mackenzie. Their eyes looked reddish, like they'd been crying, and I let them in immediately. All 5 of us sat at my kitchen table, and Mackenzie explained to me what had happened. After Emma's parents intervened, Emma tried to contact Alex in other ways, often leaving a note in her window with a location where they would meet. Emma and Chloe would organize it so that Emma's parents thought that she was at Chloe's house, while Emma would go out to meet Alex. This happened approximately 3 times in 3 to 4 weeks. On the second meeting, Alex convinced Emma that she should run away with him to his uncle's house in Moldova, a country to the west of Ukraine. On the third, Emma brought a bag full of clothes and such, under the pretense that she was sleeping over at Chloe's. Instead, she rode her bike to the train station and waited for Alex in a cafe near the train platforms. Apparently, they talked for a while, and he gave her a muffin he had bought on the way there. Emma's father called Chloe's home minutes after she left on her bike to say that she had left her teeth covers for grinding teeth and that he was going to drop them off later on. But Chloe's mother told him that Emma wasn't coming over for a sleepover and that none had been scheduled. Remember when I said we were like sisters? Our parents were fairly close as well, and trusted us enough to ask for confirmation from the friend instead of the parents at this point. Thankfully, Emma's dad knew enough to take the car off to the train station to look for her. He apparently saw her bike in the racks outside of the train station and dashed through the station looking for her. Before he had even gone into the station itself, however, he saw Alex, along with 2 other older men, walking to a large grey van, carrying Emma. He ran at them, yelling, and caused a huge scene. They dropped her, ran to the grey van, and drove off. When Emma's dad checked on Emma, it looked like she was knocked out with sleeping medication. She was taken to the doctor's office to make sure she was all right, and the police were called, and the whole thing was investigated. They never managed to track down Alex, but the police officers informed Emma's parents about young teenage girls being groomed to be kidnapped and taken to other countries like Serbia or Russia and sold into the sex trade. I listened to all of this with Camille, horrified looks on our faces, and when Mackenzie finished, Emma started crying, while she and Chloe apologized for not listening to us. We hugged it out and stayed at my house for several hours to reconnect. Since then, our friendship has been stronger, and a strong unspoken policy has been enacted in our school to let the family meet the other half of the relationship. I don't think this experience will ever leave me, even if it didn't happen to me. If you get weird feelings about someone, don't hesitate to follow your gut instinct.
Number 2.
This happened to me back in 2007. I was 9 years old and my brother was 14. My mum had sent us out of the house with about $30 to go to a movie and maybe get a bite to eat afterwards. After watching the movie, it was pretty dark and I was ready to go home. But my brother wanted to get something to eat first, and we agreed to walk to McDonald's, which was only a couple of blocks from the movie theatre. On our way there, we were stopped and approached by a man. He had a friendly smile plastered on his face, and he was holding his child's hand. There didn't seem to be anything off about this man. He was average looking, and seemed to be nothing more than a father having a day out with his son.
"Hey, do you think you could give my son and I a hand real quick?"
he asked.
"We need help loading a mattress onto the back of our truck. The truck is just up the road."
"Sorry, but we don't really have time," my brother said. It was at this time I noticed the little boy. He was about 8 years old, and he looked abnormally thin. He had a blank expression on his face and wore clothes that were much too big for him. I turned my attention back to the man, who was now mumbling to my brother about how it would only take a few seconds. My brother kindly declined again. Being the helpful kid I was, though, I joined in with the man and tried to persuade my brother that we should just help them out. I turned to my brother, who was now staring down at the little boy. My brother had a disturbed expression on his face as he looked down at the child. The child stared back at my brother, blankly. I didn't understand why my brother had that look on his face. He grabbed my hand and said, "I think that's my mum over there." He pulled me, and we began walking away from the man. I didn't understand what was going on, and why my brother had just lied about our mum being there. He didn't let go of my hand and practically dragged me until we were a far distance away from the man and his son. I looked back and could still see the man holding his son's hand. Only now, he wasn't smiling anymore. He had a look of fury on his face, and he yanked the little boy by the arm as they walked away. I pulled away from my brother's grasp and bombarded him with questions. He shushed me and pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. He dialed in a number and began pacing around nervously while talking on the phone. I remember the police showing up and my mum coming soon after. She took me home, but my brother was left with the police. I asked my mother what was going on, and she said that the police were just questioning my brother because the man we had encountered was dangerous. That's all she told me, and I went to bed. By the next morning, I had almost completely forgotten about the incident, and things went back to normal. It wasn't until a few days ago that these memories flooded back into my mind. I decided to call my now 22-year-old brother to get some answers. When I brought the ordeal back up to him, he finally gave me the information I wanted to know. And now that I know everything, I understand how fucking terrifying our encounter with that man truly was. My brother told me that while the man was constantly trying to convince us to come with him, he happened to look at the little boy. The little boy then looked at my brother with his eyes filled with terror and mouthed the words, "I'm not his son. Please help me." Then his expression went back to being completely blank, almost as if he had never said anything at all. This was why he became so freaked out and snatched me away. When he called the police, they hurried down and he described the man the best he could. They couldn't do much with the little information my brother had given, because he hadn't even seen the cars that the man supposedly had. My brother told me that a few weeks into the investigation, they had found the little boy who was with the man, but the boy was dead. His body had been cruelly dumped into the woods. The cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. If my brother had gone with that sicko, we likely would have met the same fate. He obviously couldn't have kidnapped both of us on his own, as my brother was a fairly strong fellow. That meant he had someone else with him who was also willing to snatch up unsuspecting kids. Unfortunately, they were never able to catch any of the sick fucks who did this to the child. But the man was definitely not his father. His real parents had already been searching for this missing son for almost a month. The pedophiles had managed to kidnap the poor kid and used him as their puppet to try and kidnap other children. Every time I think about that boy,